All right, now when it comes to the actual change detection, we have two change detection strategies in Angular. The default strategy, which I'm going to show you in this lecture, and on-push strategy, which you will learn later in this section for optimization. The default strategy looks at all the binding expressions in the component's template. So earlier I told you that each component gets its own change detector, which is generated at runtime. So here our movie component has only one binding expression, which is a string interpolation. Potentially we could have an image, and we could have a binding of its source attribute to, let's say, movie.image URL. So our movie component's change detector will look at these two binding expressions. It's only interested in the title and image URL properties of the movie object passed to it. It keeps track of the previous state of these properties as well as their new state. When there is a change, it tells Angular, hey, there is a change. And that's when the component needs to re-render. So let's take a look at an example. I'm going to delete this line here. Now back in app component, in onClick handler, I'm going to change the title of our first movie. So this.movies title update. And you can see in the app template, I've brought this button back. Now here, when we click this button, you can see the title of the first movie is updated. Because the change detector for movie component looks at this binding expression, it knows the previous value of movie.title as well as the new value. There is a change, so our component re-renders. Now this default strategy can be a little bit slow when you're working with complex views with large data sets. So here in this view, we have only one binding expression. Imagine if we had, let's say, 10 binding expressions here, which is pretty common in a complex real-world application. So 10 binding expressions, and let's say you're rendering 100 movies on this page. So 100 times 10 equals 1,000. So 1,000 comparison checks are done every time we have a browser event, an AJAX request, or a timer. Now 1,000 checks is really not a big deal. And as I explained before, these change detectors are highly optimized to perform thousands of comparison checks in just a few milliseconds. But once again, if you're building complex views with a lot of data, these comparison checks that are run frequently may have an impact on the performance of your application. Then you may want to use the on-push strategy to reduce the number of comparison checks. Now remember, in an Angular app, every component has its own change detection strategy. So you can use the on-push strategy for components with a lot of binding expressions that are used in a lot of places. Now, before we get to on-push strategy, you need to understand the concept of immutability in JavaScript. And that's the topic for the next lecture.